Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Neurodivergent Advantage with me, Leslie Buckman. Now, if you've been enjoying so far what we've been covering, please hit subscribe. But with this episode, we're going to go into communication and more specifically, key differences between neurotypical and neurodivergent. This can come into play in relationships, the workplace, schools, every environment that you can think of, because there are differences. And look, even as I go through, there are exceptions to the rule. So nothing of what we cover is saying, right, this is a person, this is exactly how they communicate. This is to create more of an understanding if you notice different traits come up, or if you sense that you have got a bit of misunderstanding or a bit of friction with someone. So I'd like you to do something first, I guess as a bit of an experiment, and that is Google, what does good communication look like? Even once you do that, you will probably see that traditional aspects and qualities that come up are direct eye contact, being specific, pausing and not speaking to demonstrate active listening. And look, these are all areas that I very specifically do cover whenever I'm coaching and training in being able to work through differences, conflict resolution, communication skills. But there's so much more to it, because all of those traits, they are more neurotypical. A lot of the training that's out there, a lot of the communication standards, what is communicated as the norm, these are all aspects and traits that are not natural to neurodivergent brains, or should I say a lot of neurodivergent brains, because we all have different ways of communicating. And look, I'll give you some examples. So I've just mentioned, the eye contact, the listening, things like that. But think about this. If you're having a conversation with someone in work, you're just having a general chat, but then someone else starts just asking you questions, just really directly, and they might be looking away, avoiding eye contact. How do you interpret that? Just even pause for a moment. Think about how you interpret that. Is it that you see them coming across as rude, as interrupting, as challenging? Is it that they come across as not trustworthy because they're not looking you in the eye? Here's the thing. All of those things are more in the neurodivergent way of communication. Because neurotypical, there's a lot more in body language, in tonality, and there's the quite common breakdown of 7% is words, 38% is tonality, volume, pitch, pace, and 55% is body language. But if you think about neurodivergent brains and methods of communication are a lot more literal. They say directly what they are thinking. They may not make eye contact because it feels really uncomfortable. It may be that their way of showing that they are actively listening to you is being able to communicate something as a shared experience. But what's interesting is all of these are directly qualified as traits that are rude when you're speaking with someone. So I'm just going to go through a few more examples, because it's really important to understand these differences so we can start to alleviate. The whole purpose of this is to create more understanding. And it's not to say one way is better than the other. It's just different. So I'm going to go through differences of communication, behavior traits, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can introduce this into different environments. And then we're going to finish off with what the strengths are, because we talk a lot about challenges. But the whole purpose of this podcast is it is the neurodivergent advantage. Let's just go through this a little bit. So, avoiding or limiting eye contact. Yes, sometimes it can be really uncomfortable for neurodivergent people. Some others may perceive this as is rudeness and untrustworthy. Now, thinking about this, sometimes it can be really overwhelming for some. This is their way of trying to be more comfortable and have a conversation with you. So that's more likely the reality. This is also, it's everything as I go through, This is why you'll notice quite a large element of people really do have to kind of fake a level of energy and, really try and force themselves to fit so that they feel accepted. When they're not discriminated against, they're not excluded because of assumptions. So the next one is asking a lot of questions directly. And again, you see this time and time again. There is a conversation happening. It might be between friends, it might be between team members. And even if you think about a member of the team and manager, if something's being communicated and then they're just asking question after question, you may see frustration by the other person that is on the receiving end of questions. But here's the thing to realize. They're not being rude. Quite often, when this happens, there's no intention of rudeness or malice. It's actually because they need more information. That's their way of clarifying, of working towards gaining understanding. So it may be that if you notice someone's asking a lot of questions, go through it with them. And you might even want to say, hey, I noticed, perhaps you need a bit more clarification. I'd love to go through this with you. It's not a judgment on your personality. It's not offensive. It can be genuinely, this is the person's way of trying to get the whole picture, because they may be very literal and need to qualify certain aspects. Now, other things is when we talk about long pause before responding, quite often in different environments. So think about this. If you've got a social environment where people are all just back and forth talking, or in a meeting, it can be really hard for the people that need more processing time because they're trying to get a word in. Then they can feel frustrated because they didn't know when to speak up. It may be, but by the time there was space, that the whole conversation topics moved on. So this can be really hard. But check in if you notice someone's trying to say something. And I see this happen again and again in multiple different environments. You can literally see when someone's about to try and speak. It might be that their hand moves, their body language goes forward. It might be just a little word comes out. But very rarely do people actually stop and say, oh, hey, were you trying to say something there? So be observant of people around you, because otherwise the whole environment of wherever we are, it is only serving those that can respond fast enough and comfortable in that format. Now, other aspects, it could be when you see someone really firing up lots of energy on a certain topic, but they're not engaged in something else. Even that can be judged as not putting in enough effort across the board. But again, here's the thing. When you've got neurodivergent individuals, neurodivergent brains, there is a hyper focus. And yeah, there is not that much engagement of things that they are not interested in. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's seen as a strength. You look at how this is shaped, what they're focusing on, and really encouraging that. But then, yes, if there are areas that do need to be strengthened in, work on it, find out the connection there. Because if you're trying to force an interest, it's not going to happen. And then you'll get more resentment, more frustration, and more heels being dug in. Now, other ways of communication is it may be that you could be used to someone being really energetic, very talkative, lots of hand movements. But then other times they may come across really monotone, not many facial expressions. Could just be that that person's completely run out of energy and they are flat. It doesn't mean they're being rude. Now, a couple of other points. Now, I've gone through looking at consideration of the facial expressions, the volume, tone staying consistent. So I ask you this, if you notice there's a certain way of communication that makes you think, oh, this person's being rude, I actually would just ask that you pause for a moment. Because remember this, every single one of us communicates differently. Every single one of us, different value systems, different cultural experiences, different processing times. There is no one way of operating or speaking or connecting. What there is an opportunity to really pause and slow down yourself and to look if you are only trying to connect with people as you are in exactly the same method as communication view, because that's what you're most comfortable with, or if you are in a position to lean into different opinions, different ways of speaking, different levels of directness, or pausing and giving that space, this is actually a really good growth area to start to really get to know yourself as well, and connection with other people. So what's fascinating in this is a lot of training out there. It is more in the neurotypical side of things. And look, there's no malice in this. It is, as with everything, it is society. It is when there's class as a majority, we tend to cater to that. But there is no normal. And if you're only catering to one side, you're missing a whole demographic. So look at where there's gaps. And it's not a case of, I'll give you an example. And sorry, this isn't laughing at this. It's just sometimes it's so ironic when we really try and make an effort with something, if we're perhaps saying it in an organization, right, we're going to be inclusive, you have to include everyone, you have to get along, you have to be nice. It doesn't give anything instructive. It doesn't give anything actionable. It can come across as a bit tokenistic. And the intention isn't tokenistic, it's far from it. The intention is to actually really try and make an effort. But the way to do that is to look at, and I've said this before in my podcast around culture, is it's even shifting the languaging around it. As in, we're not just being inclusive, just trying to include people, it's welcoming. Is we have a welcoming culture. It's looking at real support, as in, if someone needs more processing time or needs you to repeat something, it's not penalizing them for it. Because psychological safety is huge. If someone does not feel comfortable to be themselves, or to ask questions, or to give feedback, or to share their opinions, thoughts, you do not have a secure, good culture. That is when there is more possibility for friction, for issues, disengagement. So one aspect you can do is create that safety for someone by listening, by taking it on board when they share a genuine issue and not make them feel bad for it. It's looking at not assuming directness is rudeness or aggression. Is the person genuine? Is that just the way they communicate? And maybe if you've been used to them being a bit softer, it may be that they were really trying to mask and hide their directness because they were worried about offending someone. It's looking at offering multiple ways to contribute in meetings. It could be where it's not just verbal, it's creating opportunities for people to speak. It's noticing when someone is about to say something. So right there, it's the example in meetings, but even in a more social environment, consider people that are quieter, that don't get a chance to speak. It might be that they're happy being quieter and just observing, but check in because they might genuinely have something to say and want to be included there. Other aspects is being really specific, because when you're speaking about things, neurotypical is good with, or should I say better, with more ambiguity and more grey areas. Neurodivergent needs more clarity. So it is being specific in expectations, in what you're communicating. If it's in the workplace, it could be things like, you may think someone is not going above and beyond, but they might actually think they are because they're going and adhering to their roles and responsibilities as it is written. If you haven't specified, this is the roles and responsibilities, this is what going above and beyond looks like. Unless it is specified to that level, you may find a gap there. Other aspects are actually having those individual conversations, asking, what do you struggle with? What would look like a cultural environment where you feel comfortable to talk? What's the strength for you? Is there anything that you find that we could improve? And actually listen, not as a tokenistic, just having the conversation, moving on, then showing the real actions to what's being put in place. There's a lot of different ways that you can address this. So it could be, again, if you're having meetings, give processing time, give the opportunity to then perhaps come back later with further questions. It's creating that space for it and not having any assumptions. Now, for you, if you are a leader as well, It is getting really secure within yourself that will offer that level of support. Because if you are insecure within who you are, if you have any doubts come up, this will come across directly in how you manage situations, how you manage friction and tension that may come up through communication misunderstandings. Communication is one of the biggest causes of conflict, not always the situation itself. So work on what you need to for your self-awareness and regulation and internal growth. It's absolutely key to be able to move forward with strength in this. Now, I want to finish off with going through the advantages because, as I say, this is the neurodivergent advantage. So let's just talk about a few things. Now, I've actually got them noted down. And I am referring down to them here. Like I say, I always like to write and plot them out, but I'm going to refer to this because I want to get this really specific for you. So number one, the challenge. If someone is asking a lot of questions and it's being read as challenging the authority, start to view it as neurodivergent brains see things differently. So they may see patterns or have observations that others may not. So actually really pay attention to those questions and work through them because it may be identifying things that needed to be highlighted there. It also creates that opportunity to think differently because you don't want a group of just yes people. You need difference of thought and processing to be able to consider all scenarios, sharing stories. And this is in the situation being misread as interrupting or rudeness. So this is when someone is genuinely trying to connect. Now, yes, when we're looking at things and talking about communication, absolute presence and listening is so powerful. And I say this multiple times, it's a really important skill. But be aware of those that their way of connecting is the shared stories. If you are able to just pause for a moment when someone talks over you to share their own story, it may be that you're then able to respond and say, I'd love to hear that. And thank you, for looking at connecting with me. I just want to finish what I'm going through, but even note down what you're going to go through because I do want to hear that. That may work for you. It may be another way, but the main point here is to remove the assumption that it's someone just trying to be rude or talk over you or just shine the light on themselves. The directness, it can be misread as aggression or bluntness. The beautiful thing about neurodivergent individuals is the ability to be literal and direct. How much easier would the world be if people just literally said what they were thinking? The challenge is that is not always the case. And you and I both know that there is challenges there. Not everyone wants to hear the truth or directness. So consider this: if someone is direct and blunt, they are not necessarily meaning to be rude or aggressive. It can just be, that's just the way they talk. It just is honesty. That simple. Masking neurotypical communication. Now, this can be really exhausting. So when someone is able to drop that mask, not having to force a way of communication that doesn't come naturally, it frees up so much more energy to actually focus and hone in on being productive, on being creative, on sharing opinions, and looking at what really does work. And this is where you get a higher level of performance. It's also a high level of well-being, mental capacity, emotional capacity. Masking is destructive. And masking is, as I say, it's when you try and force yourself into another personality, another way of being that is more palatable for others to accept. Not knowing when to talk in meetings. Now, that's the challenge. But if you think about the advantage in that, when it's considered and recognized, and when you do create that shared space of not everyone having to answer quickly, of also recognizing the different processing times, this is when you'll also start to get a more robust conversation and different viewpoints, which are really beneficial to when you're looking at strategizing, to when you're looking at troubleshooting, when you're looking at, how to grow creativity. There's so many benefits to creating that space there. The eye contact, assumed as sometimes rudeness. But cognitive energy, when it's gone into thinking and processing rather than trying to force eye contact, again, you get a lot of different strengths that can then come out. So you notice the common pattern here is all starting to accept the different ways of how a person shows up and not trying to want them to fit into the preferred way of communicating. Someone that's perceived as not going above and beyond. Now, I've shared that, and it is being able to create more of a specific language. But when you define it well, you get more productivity, more precision. You get a lot better output when things are really clear. The communication style, it's penalized in performance reviews, because another thing that you'll notice is performance reviews, crewman interviews, all of these aspects, they quite often rely on an immediate answer. It doesn't cater for people that need more time to process to be able to come back to you. So look at, when you give that space, it allows for more freedom for pattern recognition and a whole nother level of depth that will not come from demanding an immediate response. An all or nothing engagement, it can be misread as laziness or disengagement. It's not. When you really start to observe hyperfocus, this will enable you to support that person a lot better so they can really get fully engaged and love what they're doing, but you will also have higher productivity as well in that area. So it's leaning into that rather than trying to fight against it. Facial expressions or tone, not matching any conversational norms. And did you notice that, again, another pattern here is a lot of judgment and assumptions. This can be a learned skill. And I pause as I say that, because that's actually something that I used to do when I was younger, because I used to have people actually saying to me, what's wrong with your face? Or, always be on the outside of any conversations. What I did is I had to learn in front of a mirror how my face sat if I wasn't speaking, or, my reactions and expressions to certain things. And I'd learn to tweak on how it actually felt with the different expressions. Then I'd test it out in real life conversations and see if people responded better to me if I was making the correct expression or the correct tone. This is why when I go through and I'm training on public speaking, aspects like that, I can go through on the technical side, because I've seen it at the ways when you do have to adjust to get that connection, to have that communication that is received in a certain way, to be able to consider your tone and body language and facial expressions. But if you had an environment where people didn't feel like they had to force what doesn't come naturally, where they are just very literal, and you are able to hear the words that they are saying, not just assume because they're not using the right tone that you want to see or the right expression that you want to see. If you are able to filter all of that out and listen to the actual words they say, that's really powerful. And lastly, when we're looking at any training and development, it's looking at it for the whole brain. So when you start to observe the differences of the individuals within your team, consider when you look at different approaches, different methods, it benefits everyone, because we look at around 20% of people are neurodivergent. So that's 1 in 5. But there's also stats that show 40% of people do not connect with traditional training and communication coaching or development. 40% actually do not connect with the more traditional ways. By adjusting and really starting to have more of a consultation process with what people want to hear, what they want to see, what they want to learn, action that they see, when you start to look into this at a deeper level, you can get a lot clearer. Yes, it feels like you are taking a lot more time in the first stages, but it gives better outcomes in the long term. So what I would like to leave you with today is, the next time you are speaking with someone or in a social environment or meeting or planning your training, think about neurodiversity, and that is neurotypical, neurodivergent. It is all brains. and looking at how we can connect with each other and what those strengths are. So the goal is not to get everyone to communicate in exactly the same way. It's actually completely the opposite of that. It's to look at removing judgment or assumptions if someone is not communicating exactly the same as us, and to be able to get that bridge to go across and understand and respect where they are coming from and their own unique individual traits. Thank you so much for listening. And I would love to hear if there's even one key takeaway that you've got from this, what it's been. I would also be really curious if you've got any suggestions or recommendations that you've seen that have worked really well for something that you do to create more connection and understanding, as we've all got different techniques. And by sharing multiple voices, multiple areas of knowledge, ways of doing things, this is how we grow. Thank you so much, and I will see you in episode 6.